Okay, great. Welcome everybody. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn session. My name is Charles Hood. I'm a Senior Program Analyst at ISE, and today's Lunch and Learn session will focus on the ISE Rapid applications in general, but then more particularly the Rapid app for outside operations. So we will talk about what are the ISE Rapid applications, and then we will go into great detail on the outside operations IDF Level 2 Rapid application. So I appreciate everyone's attendance today. I will forewarn everyone that I tend to be rather long-winded and I push my luck as far as the time. So if you are sitting there with lunch and you're hoping I'll end early, that's probably not going to happen. I'm going to try. I really am going to try, but I just never seem to make it. Just too long-winded. I don't know what the deal is with that. But just to forewarn you, so if you want to make this a working lunch, you should start eating now, because I don't think I'm going to finish early. Okay, great. So let's take a look here. This is ISE, an overview of who ISE is for those of you that don't know. We are a Infor Gold channel partner headquartered in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And we do have a customer base, 21 states and 5 Canadian provinces being supported. Founded way back in 1984. Okay, my name is Charles Hood. As I said, I'm a Senior Program Analyst at ISE. And I should add, I will be stopping periodically for questions. I got a couple slides built in here to remind me to stop, so at appropriate times. But if you do have a question before then, by all means, submit it. I will try to keep my eye on the fact that we have a question. And it seems like the question works a lot better than the chat. So if you do have a question, please submit it in the question functionality, not in the chat, if you would. Thank you so much. Okay. All right, so here's today's agenda. We're going to do a quick overview of the Rapid applications. We'll take a detailed tour of the ISE Rapid Outside Operations application and on slides in the PowerPoint. And then as time permitting, as much as possible, we'll do an actual live demo. And the live demo will be using NetLink running inside of SystemI workspace inside of the Infor OS environment. So just to let you know, so this of course works just fine with regular PowerLink or with NetLink that's not running inside of a SystemI workspace. But today's demo will be using NetLink inside a SystemI workspace, as is all the slides, the screen captures that I've captured. They're all NetLink inside a SystemI workspace. Just to forewarn you, if you're not used to that interface, if you look closely enough, you'll see that it is actually very similar to PowerLink. It's just an HTML5 application as opposed to a Java FAT client. But you'll see a lot of the layout, a lot of the functionality is similar. Okay, let's talk about what the Rapid apps are. What they are is they are IDF Level 2 extensions to XA. Of course, IDF Level 2 meaning the entire Link family, if you will, PowerLink, NetLink, SystemLink, Link Manager. So they all are graphical extensions to XA. They all were developed using Enterprise Integrator in PowerLink. And what they do is they fill in niches that are not currently filled by vanilla XA. So the one you're going to see today is kind of interesting. For the customers that we have that are using it, they use it a lot. They've integrated it very well into their business processes. They really like it. We've actually enhanced it here and there per customer request. But at some point, this one will be superseded by Infor XA development, because they're supposed to be bringing the whole PC&C, production, costing, and control application into IDF Level 2, most likely for release 9.3. But still, until that happens, this is a viable application, so we want to show it to you. And we design our Rapid apps to increase user productivity. This one in particular, right now is only available at as of 9.2 in green screen. So getting it into IDF level 2 helped a lot, and then various people at ISE contributed different ideas and made it even more efficient and better for boosting user productivity. Okay, I'll take a quick tour. Okay, so XA, of course, has had the PC&C green screen application for decades, and the outside operations was a very welcome enhancement to XA back at release 6. It was one of the big areas where XA just was missing functionality. So back at release 6 in 2003, this enhancement was worked on, and you may remember, for those of you that remember the MAPIX Inc. days, MAPIX had the voting on the enhancements every year, and outside operations definitely was on top of the list year after year after year. So they grabbed a couple people in the support organization, of which I was one, and basically told us we were going to work on a development enhancement until it was completed. So we did. So I was one of the ones that developed the outside operations functionality in PC&C menu option 10. In particular, I did the outside operation details. So if you do PC&C option 10, then option 1, that was my contribution. And plus I had some of the background stuff, like when you purge in MO and it goes to history, I made sure all the records related to outside operations were purged and all of that. The detailed documentation available from InfoWorks is SH14754. That's very good documentation. Highly recommended. It was very well done from the get-go. As I said at the present, this is limited only to green screen. It's not in PowerLink, not native anyway. It would have to be added through Enterprise Integrator if you're going to use it at the current release. And we definitely all agree that IDF level 2 functionality could greatly improve the outside op details maintenance in particular, because that maintenance screen is very cumbersome. The keys to the outside op detail, the OOP DTL, sometimes affectionately referred to as UPDITL file, it's a very involved key. It involves some engineering data, for a routing operation in EPDM, and then you have vendor information, warehouse information, things like that. So IDF level 2 templates greatly improve that maintenance capability. Okay, so first thing we did was we decided that by site, by EPDM site, we should allow defaults to be set. So if you have a site, you can say which warehouse will default when you're creating a new outside op detail record, things like that, default vendor number, and then all the outside operation detail options, like are you going to automatically create a PO when you create an MO that has an outside operation, yes or no? Are you going to copy the outside operation comments to become PO comments? All of those switches and drop downs are incorporated into the defaults. So that way you can fill in a lot of the values, or at least have defaults. You can always override them, as we'll see here in a minute. But that helps a lot with creating those outside op detail records. Okay, one of the ISE business consultants had the great idea when we were originally developing this, that the users should be able to create an outside operation detail record directly from an EPDM routing operation record. And that was a truly inspired idea, and I can't take credit for that. So we allow that now. So it's a maintenance option on EPDM routing operations if you install our application. And it makes the creation of those outside op detail records even easier. We brought in the outside op detail records as a business object into IDF level 2, so you can view those records and also maintain them. They are created from the EPDM routing operation, but they can be changed, or you can at least attempt to delete them. And if they're not being referenced anywhere, they can be deleted in that IDF level 2 object. And we also allowed for the viewing of the outside op cross-reference records, the records that tie together a manufacturing order that has an outside operation with a purchase order for that outside operation. And we also allow what's called the entry of PO data for one of those records as well, if a purchase order hasn't yet been associated. Okay, so here's our first screen. Here's what this looks like. And again, this is NetLink running inside a SystemI workspace inside the Infor OS ecosystem. So what we have here is, and this is a custom file. This is not an Infor.exe file. This is a custom file with a custom business object built over it. So what it does is it allows defaults to be set up for a site. So we have this Milwaukee site, MKE. You can say what the default warehouse is going to be when you set up new outside up detail records inside this site. And then what about the quantity cost update? There's three options there if you're familiar with this. Probably the most widely used is this one: quantity and cost get updated when the RP is entered, but that doesn't have to be the case. You can do the quantity and cost update at invoice time, or you can do the quantity at RP and then the cost at invoice. So those are the three options that will be available from that dropdown that we'll see when we get to the demo. The auto create PO, you either create the PO at MO release or you don't, so that's more or less a Boolean. You have an auto release time fence value, and then the auto release code. If you're familiar with the MRP purchase order auto release, it's all those options. You can either do nothing, you can create a requisition automatically, you can create a single PO. That PO can be held or could be fixed. Then you can create a blanket PO. So that option would add new blanket releases to an existing PO. And then that blanket PO can be held or fixed as well. So there's quite a long list in that dropdown, but that's basically what you're controlling there, whether you get a requisition or a PO. And if it's a PO, is it going to be a single PO each time, or is it going to add blanket releases, and then you can have the POs held or fixed as well. Okay, then lastly, you have a couple Booleans. So will the RP update the operation status, and then will the additional descriptions on the outside operation automatically become PO comments, yes or no? So you complete these values in this default record, and then once you've created this default record, those values automatically come in as defaults. Now you can override them, but they come in as defaults when you're creating an outside operation detail record for a specific finished good item against a particular vendor for a particular warehouse. So all these other values come in automatically. They don't have to be filled in, but then you do have the ability to override them. These are just defaults. So these aren't etched in stone, so to speak. Each time you create a record, you can override the defaults. Okay, we do have a second screen here for settings, and one of our customers actually requested this. So what happens is when an outside operation detail record is created through our application, we change the user field switch A in the EPDM routing operation record for that routing operation to be yes. And what that enables, and this is pretty neat, so what this customer did was they exported all of their outside operations from EPDM routing operations. Every outside operation that has a time basis code is C, and of course that defines an outside op in XA. They downloaded all those, exported them and downloaded them into an Excel spreadsheet. And then they knew all the values that need to be filled in, like the service item. That's a biggie. You know, what service item we're going to use for this particular end item for this particular operation for this vendor. So you fill in what service item should be used, and that's of course especially critical if you're going to be auto creating requisitions or POs. And there's other values too. So basically they sat down, the conference room was kind of like a war room kind of thing, and they all just kind of locked themselves in there, downloaded all of the routing operations, filled in all the values that they needed, and then they just one by one created from our app the outside op detail records. And because we had this switch set to yes, and they were subsetting based upon that switch. So what happened was every time they created one and they refreshed the screen, all the ones that were already done dropped off so they could see the ones they still had left. And they were able to bang out hundreds of these records in a matter of like 2 hours. So it was pretty neat. So anyway, that's what that's doing. That just shows you if you've already created an outside op record already. Okay. Yeah, so I see a question. So thank you, Joe. Can you use the Rapid app if you're not EPDM? We've never actually had someone request a PDM version, but it certainly could be developed with no problem at all. Most of the code would be the same. Some of the edits, of course, would be different. Obviously, in EPDM, you need to edit that the site is valid, that the item revision exists, whereas in PDM, you're just looking for an item master record at the item level, that kind of thing. The underlying files are different. You've got that you got that one routing file in PDM, whereas in EPDM, you got the routing header and the routing operation. So the editing would be different, but other than that, it would be the same. So, and of course, if we're going to do a PDM version, then we would be creating outside op detail records from the PDM plus routing operation object, not the EPDM routing object. So, but as far as the rest of it, the outside op details, the MOPO cross references, all of that would be the same. So great, thank you for that question. All right, so if you're going to create an outside op detail record, and this really is one of the best points of this application. That's why I mention it so much. So as you can see in the background there in NetLink, I have a list view of all the outside operations. Again, in XA, outside operations are designated or defined by having the time basis code equals C. So XA knows that that value is really a cost for an outside operation. It's not a runtime. And so what we do then is we have a custom maintain task called create underscore outside underscore op underscore details. And I deliberately put those underscores in there just in case Infor ever decides to name a logical transaction by the same name, then we won't collide, because those are really business objects under the covers. So I put those underscores in there, and you can always tell if it's an ISE Rapid app task because you'll see those underscores. That's kind of my signature, if you will. Kind of like, people that make paintings and they sign it in the bottom corner. You can always tell I did something with those underscores. So anyway, what you do is if you've selected one of the routing operation records, you then can choose to run that maintenance task, and it will bring up the template to create a new outside op detail record. And there's the template. Now, I should mention, remember I talked about the defaults. So everything from the warehouse ID down is coming from the default record. Those 7 values from the warehouse ID down, those 7 values are all coming from the defaults. Now notice they're all maintainable. You can actually change that warehouse. You can change those update options, the auto release options, and then those 2 Booleans, you can change them, but they got auto populated from the default record for the site MKE. Okay, so then it's up to you to decide on a vendor number for that particular outside operation. You can actually have multiple, but only one of them can be the preferred vendor at one time. That limitation may be lifted, who knows, when Infor brings this into XA themselves. There may be kind of like a vendor split, kind of like what MRP can do with the multi-source vendor splitting. So we'll see how that goes. But for right now, for a particular finished good item, for an particular operation against a particular warehouse, then one and only one vendor can be the preferred vendor, because XA has to have a vendor when you're going to auto create a PO. Obviously, vendor's extremely important for a PO, so that's why they have that. But you can have alternate ones set up and ready to go if you wanted to swap which one's the preferred vendor. You can do that if you want to. That way, one week they could go to one vendor, the next week they could go to a different vendor, that kind of thing. And then you got to enter a service item. That's very important. It can't be the finished good item itself. It needs to be a service item, so representing the outside service that the outside vendor will be performing. Okay. Now, that template was already kind of big, but if you imagine in the demo, you can move that scroll bar down, and one thing that's down there is the auto advance checkbox. So that's how that one customer I was telling you about, how they cranked through 200 of these in the matter of a couple hours, because they had all their outside operations list view in PowerLink, and they were just creating these one after another, and they were auto advancing through. And so each time they created one, it refreshed that user field, and so that one dropped off the list view, and it just kept going like that. So you can auto advance on this and do a whole bunch of these at one time. It's not a mass create, but it's a one by one create, but it does automatically move you through the records if you're familiar with auto advance. Okay, we have very robust editing. I mentioned I was on the team that developed the outside op details, and I actually did the coding for outside op details. So basically, I just used the same edits that the XA green screen does. And so it's the exact same messages and message IDs that you'd see in the green screen. All right, so we have the exact same editing that XA has, no more and no less. Okay. All right, then this is a list view of the outside op detail records. Now this, if you're familiar with the green screen, PC&C, option 10, then option 1, outside op details, this should look familiar to you. It's basically laid out like the green screen is. Of course, this being IDF level 2, you can have views, subsets, and sorts, so you can swap around the columns, include other columns, exclude certain columns, etc. Everything you can do with a view. Of course, you can have a subset and a sort applied here as well, being IDF level 2. So that's a huge advantage over the green screen, of course. So here they are. So you can see the bottom 4 are set up against particular finished items for particular operation sequence, and that of course is an outside operation, and then a particular service item number is linked there. That top one is a kind of skeleton default record for the entire site, and that one can be used if you have an on-the-fly outside operation. For example, you have an item, maybe normally you do some gold plating on it and you do it in-house, but you got a huge rush order against that item and you just don't have the capacity to do all that gold plating in-house, so you're going to outsource some of it to an outside vendor, and normally you wouldn't be doing that for that item. It's not, that routing does not have an active operation for that vendor as an outside operation, so you're just going to set it up one time on that one MO. That's what that top record is for. That way it'll create an MOPO cross-reference record. So that was the first big enhancement to the XA outside ops that got requested after we completed that project. So you can do that. You can have one default record per site, and that allows you to do off the cuff or on the fly outside operations against MOs that normally would not have them. Okay, I mentioned earlier the outside op detail records. They're created from the EPDM routing operations, or if we do a PDM version, it'll be the PDM routing operation. So that's where they get created. So you notice here, you see the pencil and you see the quick change, and then you see the trash can. So you can maintain or delete from this business object. And again, they're created from EPDM. Okay, great. I was just checking the questions. All right, now, so you can see all the key fields, of course, are not maintainable. So the site, the warehouse, vendor, et cetera, the finished item number, and all the EPDM data, routing ID, routing version, operation sequence. Now those are all key fields, so those are all fixed. But any of the non-key fields can be maintained, which of course is the same situation as the XA green screen. So you can change whether a particular record, if you have multiple vendors set up against the same outside op in the same warehouse, you can say which one, you can change which one's preferred. So you can toggle one of them to no and the other one to yes, that kind of thing. And then you can update the lead times, and then all these drop-down lists, you can update those as well. And then if a outside op detail record is not being referenced anywhere and you really don't want it anymore, you can delete it if you want to. Typically people leave these, just for audit trail purposes, but if you really did want to clean up your outside op detail file and get rid of some old ones, you can do that if you want to. Okay, all right. I mentioned how you can set up a default operation detail record for a site. And again, that was almost immediately after we released the outside operation enhancement back at release 6 in 2003. This was the first thing that our customers requested, was a kind of just a general skeleton record for the site so that you could have the cross-reference records set up for on-the-fly outside operations. So that option exists as a custom maintenance option off of our custom outside ops defaults business object. You may remember those are the records that associate defaults with a site. So if you go into you highlight one of those sites in that business object and you take this maintenance option, you will be able to set up a default outside operation. There's that updiddle. I think it's the coolest file name in XA, but that's just my opinion. Okay, here's the template that gets set up. There's not a lot going on there. In order for one of these records to be set up as a default, the vendor has to be *DFLT. Those of you that know XA, of course, know the vendor number is only 6 characters. That's why it's *DFLT. The finished item number has to be *default. And then those next 2 options you can set. How do you want the quantity cost update to happen? You know, you got those 3 options again. They can both happen at the RP, they can both happen at the invoice, or you can update the quantity at the RP and the cost at the invoice. And then do you want, when the cost is updated, do you automatically want to update the operation status as well? Yes or no? Okay, so those are real simple records, but that associates one of those skeleton records with a site in the outside operation detail file. Here's the last business object, and this is the option 2 on PC&C menu option 10. This is option 2 for outside operations. It's the cross-reference of the MO operations and then the associated POs or requisitions for that particular outside operation. So if you set up your outside op detail records to auto-generate requisitions or POs, then of course it will do that, and you will get a requisition. You can see those first 3 records under purchase order number, they all start with an R, so those are requisitions. And then the last 5 are actual POs. You can see how in the middle there, the middle 2 records, you have the same purchase order number, but that's because that's a blanket purchase order. So that first entry was blanket sequence number 1. That second entry for PO 000014 is for blanket release sequence 2. So again, you can set these up to create individual POs. Actually, the PO 000015, those 2 records are blankets as well. So you can set these up to create a single PO each time or to add blanket releases to an existing blanket PO line item. So that's what you have there, the MOPO cross-reference records. Now, if you use one of those skeleton records for the site, because you had a on-the-fly outside operation that you normally wouldn't associate with an item, but you had a particular need, kind of a one-off need for an outside operation, whether it be sandblasting, gold plating, heat treating, whatever it may be, through an outside vendor that you don't normally do through an outside vendor. Maybe you normally handle it internally. What you can do is if you have one of those cross-reference records set up that was against one of those skeleton records. So what happened here is I created an MO for this particular item, 703MB, and I don't have an outside op detail record for that item. That finished good item is not set up in that file, in the outside op detail file, because normally it does not have an outside operation. But now we've run into a situation where we have an MO created and we need a one-off outside operation. So we've added an outside operation using OBPM, and we've added an outside operation. That MO got created, and now it created automatically, XA created the MOPO cross-reference record. But notice there's no PO associated with, but that's because you may remember the vendor number is just *DFLT. That's not obviously a valid vendor number. And then the finished good item number was just *default. So XA doesn't have what it needs to create a PO. So what we allow you to do is you highlight one of those records and then you click on add purchase order data, and then you can add in the PO data for this particular MO. So what is the purchase order that's going to be, or requisition that's going to be used for this particular outside operation? And here's the template that we set up for that. So you can see you have an MO number, you have an operation sequence number, and then you add in, you can either, there's one of two ways to do this. You can either add in the PO number, the line number, and then if it has a blanket release, the blanket release number. And notice at the top there, it was fetching the PO number, the PO line number, the blanket release sequence number from the file. Of course, that record didn't have any yet. So that's why I put user entered in parentheses just to avoid any confusion there. So those are the ones you would enter. Now, if you really don't want to enter the PO number, the PO line, and the blanket release, you can instead enter what service item number are you going to use, and then the warehouse, and then the miscellaneous service item sequence number, and it'll figure out what blanket release you're actually using. So you can do that too. Okay, so that's how you add purchase order data. That's through a custom maintenance transaction. Notice the underscores so you can tell it's one of our custom transactions. Okay, so just summarizing some of the highlights. Our outside operation rapid application, it's definitely customizable IDF level 2 architecture. So we have business objects. That default business object is a custom business object. And then we also brought in the XA outside op detail and MOPO cross-reference files as business objects as well. And of course, when I say customizable IDF level 2 architecture, I'm referring to the fact that you can apply views, subsets, and sorts. You can set up relationships to other business objects using Enterprise Integrator, so it's easy to navigate around to related business objects. So that's what I mean by customizable IDF level 2 architecture. And second bullet point, probably the biggest plus there is in our application. You can create these outside op detail records directly from EPDM routing operation records, and we saw how that works. You highlight the routing operation and say that you want to create an outside op detail record, then that template pops up. And then you may remember the bottom 7 values on that template come from your default file for your site. So it makes the whole thing much easier, much quicker than using the green screen. And again, you can use auto advance, so you can auto advance through the EPDM routing operation records. And one of the nice things I didn't stress too much is when you're using our application to create an outside op detail record from an EPDM routing operation, then all the key fields from the EPDM routing operation are automatically populated. So, and those can be a little confusing sometimes. Is the routing ID an item number or not? Does it have to be? No, you could have a generic routing. So that sometimes gets people confused. So our application takes care of all that by just bringing in the values from EPDM, and then you don't have to think about them like you have to do with the green screen. That green screen definitely gets confusing for folks. Okay, I mentioned you can use auto advance to rapidly create many of these records, and we've seen that happen at customer sites. I mentioned you can set defaults by EPDM site ID. So the customers where we've installed this, they typically have a conference, they bring in engineers, they bring in accountants, they bring in the purchasing manager, they bring in a material planner, and maybe their warehouse shipping person that's going to be shipping the material to the vendors, and they all decide on the defaults they want to have, and then they basically consider them as settled. Of course, obviously in PowerLink or NetLink, you can change them later, but they set them exactly the way they want for each site, then they leave them alone and they lock down. That's another nice thing about IDF level 2, you can lock down the business objects or the individual records with content security. So you can, if you want it to be a set it and forget it kind of thing, you can. And that way it's set once and then no one's allowed to touch it. And I talked about we have robust editing. We have the exact same editing that the XA, PC&C outside ops have for setting up the outside op detail records. Okay, I mentioned you can display, maintain, and delete outside op detail records. You can create a default outside op detail records for an EPDM site. You may remember the vendor number and the finished item number, get the asterisk values, DFLT for the vendor, asterisk default for the finished item number. You can display the MOPO cross-reference records, and then if you have one of those records where the PO data does not yet exist, you can add the PO data. Okay, any questions at this point? Take just a minute. I know that was a lot of material, and I know some of you may not be used to seeing that NetLink interface. But again, if you look closely, it's the same list views, the same cards, the same card files as PowerLink. But go ahead if there's any questions on any of that. Even if you have a general question on outside operations, I can attempt to answer them as well. And then if there's no questions here, after about a minute or so, we'll actually do a live demo here. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Let me expand this little. Okay, yeah, I don't see any new questions. So in about 30 more seconds, I'll go ahead and go to a demo. But feel free, if you do have a question, to submit it via the question functionality. Okay, I guess what we'll do then, if I can be coordinated here, show my taskbar. Okie dokie. All right, so what I have here is, this is the SystemI Workspace homepage. And think of this as, for those of you that aren't familiar with this, this is basically the same as the main browser screen in PowerLink. That first screen after you log in, of course, and connect, that first screen, the main homepage, if you will, for PowerLink, it has all the application tabs on the right, and then it has icons for all the business objects. That's basically, as a matter of fact, it's not basically, that's exactly what this is. It's just in a node layout. So all these, let me collapse engineering, it might be a little easier to see this. So basically you have a default card file, and then these would be all the application tabs on that default card file. And then you, just like in XA and PowerLink, if you go to one of those tabs, then you can start seeing the business objects. Of course, sometimes you have sub tabs, like engineering has the PDM tab and then the EPDM tab. So some of them, like if you're going to go into engineering, you might have the different tabs. There's that tab for the code files as well. But then you start seeing the individual business objects, enterprise items, sites, item revisions, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so what I'm going to show you then is, let's look at the outside ops defaults. And most of our environments, we just have this Milwaukee site. So what I'm going to do is use NetLink here, and I'm going to, and again, this is a completely custom database table, and we've built a business object around it because it just setting up these defaults makes creating the outside op detail records a lot quicker. Okay, so I'm going to open up the card, if you will. So notice up here, these are the different tabs you would see in PowerLink. On the top, if you have them set up to be on the top, of course they can be on the right or on the left in PowerLink, or on the bottom, depending on how you customize your main preferences. So anyway, here's the options for the MKE site. And you can see all the various options. What I'm going to do is go into change mode. There's those three quantity cost update options that I've mentioned several times. When do you update the quantity and the cost at the RP at the invoice, or do you do the quantity at the RP and the cost at the invoice? Here's that auto create, all those, are you going to create a PO at MO release or not? I got a little ahead of myself. Here's the auto release code itself, and here's all those options. So what I'm going to do here to make this a viable demo is I'm going to actually change that value from create a requisition to single purchase order. So this way, every time XA runs the release of an MO, it's going to auto create the PO, and it's going to create a for an outside operation if there's an matching outside op detail record, and it would create a new PO each time. That's what this single purchase order is about. It would not add to an existing blanket release. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to click on the update button. All right, so that just updated that. You can see the value up here, 3 equals single purchase order. So that record got updated. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new record here just so you can see how it's done. So this is an outside op defaults record, which is linked to a site. So I need to find my site. And we have this other site now called OOP for outside operation processing. Okay. And there's my options. These are all the defaults that I can set for a site. And again, these really help. Having these preset in the beginning really help create outside op detail records a lot quicker. And again, you can be real strict once you set this up. You can lock this down very tightly through content security and normal IDF level 2 security options. All right, so I'm going to do the quantity and cost at the RP. Yes, I'm going to allow auto create of a PO at the MO release. I'm going to again do a single purchase order. And then I'm going to actually change both of these to yes. Of course, those could be no, but I want the operation status to be automatically updated. And I want the routing descriptions for my outside operation to become PO comments automatically on the PO. Okay, so I've filled in everything. Everything should be good. Click create, and there I am. Okay, so that's another default record. Okay, now what I want to do is go to the EPDM routing operations. Now, one thing you notice immediately, you say, hey, color. So NetLink, of course, does honor the presentation schemes that you set up in PowerLink for various business objects. So it does honor the presentation schemes. You do have to restart the NetLink controller and server for NetLink to cache them into its cache. But as long as you've done that, it does honor them. So here's what I was talking about earlier about that setting where that user field is set to yes once an outside op detail record has been set up for a particular routing operation. So I'm just looking at outside ops here. I'm not looking at any in-house operations. I'm just looking at outside ops. And you notice these two I have here, one for item 702, or technically routing ID 702, it does happen to be linked to an item 702, and the same with routing ID 703, item 703. Those do not yet have a matching outside op detail record. Okay, those other 4 do. So if I want to update the outside op detail records for them, I would go to the outside op file itself, and of course I could do that real easily going to the display menu. It's a related business object, so if I clicked on that for any record that I had highlighted, it would bring up the outside op details. But what I really want to show you now is creating one of these. So I have an outside op, that second and third record, they do not yet have a matching outside op detail record, and my presentation scheme is trying its best to alert you to that fact and using red and everything, but not too obnoxious a color of red, I hope. Okay, so then remember under maintain, create outside op detail records. Okay, and you may remember from the warehouse down, all those values come from the site level record with defaults for the particular site, for the MKE site. Now you may remember I just changed the value in that default record to 3 equals single purchase order. Before that, it was 1 equals requisition. So that change that we just made is indeed coming through. All right, let me find the vendor that I want to use. Okay, we have a couple here. Here's one, custom paint, because these are all outside painting operations. Okay, so that populates the vendor. Now I need my service item number. So I could make that a little more granular search by entering where it said description contains. But what I want is, there it is. There's my outside op painting for that 702 finished good. So there you go. So my service item is linked to my finished item, and that's typically what I see at customer sites is they create even in the service item number, you know which finished good or subassembly item it's being linked back to. Okay, so everything looks good. Now you may remember you can auto advance here. And since I have 2 of these, I will auto advance. So I'm going to click continue, and provided I've entered valid data in all the input boxes, if you know EPDM, the routing version being blank is not a problem. If you don't have a revision populated for that finished item number, then blank is a perfectly acceptable value for item revision. Let me actually put in a little bit of lead time though. 0 days isn't really too realistic unless maybe the vendor is literally next door to you. So I put in a 5-day lead time there. And maybe we do need some inspection once we receive the items back in, so I'll put 1 day there as well. Okay, now I'm gonna click continue. All right, so it created that one record, and now it auto advanced. And you can see how if you auto advance, you can just keep doing these one after another after another. And unlike the green screen, we're retaining and auto populating a lot of these values, and then you're using the defaults as well. So that's how you're able to create a ton of these. Notice the vendor number stayed the same from the previous record. So I could keep that, or I could choose another vendor. In this case, I'm going to say, yeah, these are very related items. I would use that same vendor, so I can keep the vendor number, and that's a big plus over the green screen. Okay, now the service item, I want the service item linked to end item 703. There it is. I'm just going to grab that. And again, I really do need some lead time. Now these particular ones are a little bit more hard to deal with, so I need 8 days, not just 5. They're just, I don't know, more finicky or whatever. And I still need a day of to account for in-house inspection when I receive them back from the vendor. And again, these do not have to, you don't have to use the default values. The way we ship this vanilla, you could force the logic under the covers to use the defaults. If you set the defaults exactly the way you want and you don't want anyone varying from them, we could force it to always use the defaults, and then those fields on the template would not be maintainable. But the way we ship it, they are overrideable, I guess is the word I should use. So you have a default, but you can still override them. So I'm actually going to allow a blanket purchase order here instead of a single purchase order every time. Okay, and I'm going to uncheck auto release because I only had 2 of these. All right, now if I refresh the screen. Okay, good. So everybody's happy, everybody's green. All right, it's not easy being green, right? Kermit the Frog said. So, but they're all green here. If I uncheck that particular row, that you can see. So those 2 that did not have outside op detail records now do. Okay, so I'm going to move along here. Again, I'm long-winded. I will quit in 5 minutes, no matter where I'm at. Okay, because I know some of you need to finish lunch and that kind of thing. Okay, so now you've seen how we create the outside op detail records from the routing operations, and that was really the main thing I wanted you to see. Okay, now, well, what I'll show you too is these outside op defaults. Let me go back there. Look at how in the outside op details, I have a default record for the MKE site, but you may remember I now have a new site called OOP. Okay, and so what I want to do for OOP is I want to set up one of those skeleton records as well. So I'm going to click on create default updiddle for the site. Vendor and finished item, both those values have to be the way they are. If you change those, it will fuss at you. If you had a bunch of sites, you could auto advance. In this case, I only have this one particular site, and then you can change this. Okay, in this particular case, we'll say, okay, let's update the quantity of the operation at the RP and then the cost at invoice time. And then do I want to update the operation status at cost update? Most definitely. So I'm going to click continue. Now, if I go back to my outside op details and refresh the screen, I should see a skeleton record for that OOP site. There it is. There it is. Okay, great. I always feel like I'm living dangerously in these live demos, but everything's behaving as it should, of course. So there we have that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now real quickly is, and this will be the last thing I do, I'm going to create an MO for that item 702. And what I want you to see, if you're not familiar with outside operation, I want you to see what should happen is the new MO should automatically have a PO associated with it, because you may remember outside op details 702. Let's see how we set that up. We set it up for a single purchase order, so it should create a brand new purchase order to use against this MO. So let's go ahead and do that. So let me go back to my main page here, and I need to go into production, manufacturing orders. All right, so what I want to do here is create a brand new MO for that 702 item. I know the item number, I should just key it in. Sometimes you can get too reliant on some of the built-in functionality. Wouldn't have killed me just a key in 702 there. I also know it's warehouse ISE, but I'm still going to be lazy here and do this. Okay, great. So ISE 702. Okay, now I can't get around the fact that I need to key something here. Let's do 20 of them. And the due date, let's make the due date the last day of this month. Okay, I do want to include the primary bill of material, the primary routing. Let's print the shop packet right at MO release. Okay, I am going to preview. So there we go. All right, so this is just like in PowerLink, you have a card file show up. So there's all my general information. It's figured out, the cost and whatnot. It's figured out the location and all that. So we're good to go there. What I want you to see though is 702 has an outside operation. And you may remember from our outside op details, 702 has an outside op detail record set up for that operation 0005. So all of that being the case, then we really should get an MOPO cross-reference record through the XA outside operation functionality when I create this MO. So there it is. So I'm going to hit create. Alrighty, so let's see. Let me go back to that manufacturing orders list view. All right, there it is. So there's my new MO, M000150. And if I go to my cross-reference and refresh, there it is. So I have the cross-reference record. It generated PO 000019 automatically. Notice it's not a blanket release. It's just that one line item, and that's it. It is a service item, so it does have the service item sequence number. Telling you the PO was automatically generated and it was released, so everything's good. Okay, that's as much as I dare show you because I'm running out of time and I want you to have a little bit of time, if you didn't eat your lunch, to do so. Are there any questions on anything, on ISCs, Rapidaps, on outside operations in general, XA, PC&C outside operations, on the future of XA outside operations, or any of the business objects in this Rapidap? I'll stay on the line here and won't close the webinar until all the questions are, oh, look at that, I just got a alert through Mingle about that manufactured order that I just created and released. All right, but yeah, feel free to ask any questions, PC&C outside ops, our Rapid application in particular, any of the business objects, the outside op defaults, the outside op details, the way we integrate with the routing operations business object, any of that, anything about the underlying architecture in Enterprise Integrator, user exit programs, anything like that. All of that's fair game. All right, like I said, I'll hang around a little bit here. And I really appreciate everyone's attendance today. I hope you enjoyed the session. I did do a recording, so a link to the recording will be generated. So again, thank you very much. Okay, it looks like we have a question. Oh, thank you, Jeannie. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that so much. All right, what I'll basically do then, if there's no questions, I'll just wait till the top of the hour. But if you don't have a question, by all means, you are definitely more than welcome to exit the webinar. Of course, you already had that right, but I just want to stress the fact I'm definitely done. I'm just going to wait for questions. So if you don't have a question, feel free to log out or disconnect from the webinar. All right, just I guess to save time and space, I am going to shut down the recording because it doesn't look like we're going to get any questions. So I'm going to stop the recording.